blocked by a phone addict in the parking garage, horn was necessary. Just the other day, I found myself parking in the underground lot of a small shopping center. I opted for a space where I could pull in head first, positioning my car right next to a large structural column on my left side. At the time I arrived, the parking spot adjacent to mine was completely empty. When I returned to my vehicle, arms laden with shopping bags, I discovered a man had parked in the previously empty space, reversing his car in. He was deeply engrossed in a phone conversation, standing directly between my car and his with his driver's side door swung wide open. It was practically touching my own driver's door. I offered a polite nod in his direction as a greeting, proceeded to load my purchased items into the trunk of my car, and then returned the shopping cart to its designated spot. Upon coming back to my car, I said a clear, "Excuse me please," intending to signal that I needed to get into my vehicle and leave, assuming he would realize I wanted to depart. He responded with a significant, unpleasant glare directed sideways, still engrossed in his phone conversation, but he did shift slightly and close his car door just enough for me to squeeze into my driver's seat. No sooner had I settled into my seat than he proceeded to swing his door open once more. Now, if I had attempted to reverse out of the parking space at that moment, my side mirror would have undoubtedly collided with his open door, and maneuvering my car in the opposite direction was impossible due to the column on my left. I lowered my window and politely inquired, "Excuse me, could you possibly close your door? I need to be able to pull out of this space." He shot me an even more intense glare, held up a single finger in a dismissive "hold on" gesture, and then turned his back to me, resuming his phone conversation. Right then, I decided on a course of action. I closed my car window, engaged the door locks, made direct eye contact with him, and firmly pressed down on the car horn. He whirled around and the expression on his face was absolutely murderous. He was still on the phone. My hand remained firmly planted on the horn. His glare intensified even further. My hand remained steadfastly on the horn. I raised my eyebrows in a silent question and maintained unwavering eye contact. Finally, he huffed, got into his car, and slammed his door shut with unnecessary force. I removed my hand from the horn. "Thank you," I mouthed at him with a saccharine sweet smile, and then carefully reversed my car out of the space. Was my reaction a bit petty? Undeniably. Did it bring a sense of satisfaction? Absolutely, yes. Oh, the audacity of some people, right? Like your time and space mean absolutely nothing. Hit that subscribe button if you have dealt with parking lot phone zombies too. Mid-flight meltdown, entitled "Kid Demands My Drink, Mom Backs Him Up." Please excuse any errors, as English is not my first language. I recently returned from a flight from Dubai, and unfortunately, I was seated next to a mother and her incredibly ill-mannered child. I was already feeling apprehensive because past experiences with children on flights have been less than pleasant, so my mood wasn't exactly starting off positive. The flight began relatively smoothly, but it wasn't long before things deteriorated rapidly. This child, who appeared to be around 5 or 6 years old, started running amok in the aisle, tossing toys around, and generally creating a chaotic mess. The flight attendants were visibly struggling to manage the situation, but the mother seemed completely detached, simply scrolling through her phone as if nothing was amiss. When other passengers looked annoyed, she would just dismissively tell them to ignore her son because he's just a kid. About halfway into the flight, I ordered a Coca-Cola. The moment it arrived, the child locked onto it with laser focus. He began to whine loudly and point insistently at my drink, causing a considerable disturbance. Before I could fully process what was happening, the mother was directing hostile glares at me, as if I were some kind of villain for not immediately offering my soda to her precious offspring. She leaned across the aisle towards me and, in a tone absolutely dripping with entitlement, declared, "He really wants your drink. Just give it to him." I was genuinely taken aback. I mean, drinks are complimentary on flights. Why not just ask the flight attendant to bring one for her son? When I politely refused and suggested she could simply request another Coke from the flight attendant for her child, she let out an exaggerated huff and dramatically rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath that I couldn't quite catch. Being a somewhat petty person, I decided to savor my drink slowly and deliberately, pointedly listening to music loudly on my headphones. To further emphasize my point, I ordered another Coke a little later. This time her son actually attempted to snatch the drink directly from the flight attendant's hand as it was being served to me. The flight attendant, to her credit, quietly but firmly reprimanded the mother, instructing her to control her child. The mother then proceeded to sigh and pant heavily, as if she had just completed a grueling marathon without any prior training. For the remainder of the flight, she continued to glare daggers at me as if I had reported her to some authority figure, all while her child continued his reign of disruptive behavior. It truly is astonishing how some parents operate under the delusion that the entire world should revolve around them and their poorly behaved children. It begs the question, why choose to have children if you are fundamentally unwilling to actually parent them in a responsible manner? Racist customers' jaw-dropping demand, whites only for our business. I'm not even sure if this is the right place to share this story, but I just need to vent about something that happened. For context, I'm a 28-year-old woman living in Colorado, and my family immigrated to the United States from the former Yugoslavia. My mother is Serbian and my father is Montenegrin. My dad runs his own home renovation business. He actually got the idea after being inspired by the old TV show Home Improvement. Even though I have my own full-time job, I help out with my dad's business part-time, mainly doing office administration and payroll tasks. My dad employs two fantastic workers, both of whom are originally from the Philippines. Recently, we had a customer book a renovation job. My dad sent Miguel and his colleague to the customer's house to start the work, but they were immediately turned away at the door. The customer just told them to leave. Miguel texted me to let me know what happened, and at first, I honestly just assumed that the customer had changed their mind and wanted to cancel the job. However, just a few minutes after I got the text from Miguel, I received a phone call directly from the customer. Let's call him Ken. Ken was absolutely furious. He started ranting and raving about how he didn't want China's employees in his house. He complained loudly about them stealing jobs from white men. And then, unbelievably, he actually demanded that we fire our current employees and replace them with white employees. He insisted that we send someone to his house who was white, and in his words, not an immigrant. And at this point, I pretty much knew exactly how this conversation was going to go, but I decided to engage with him a little further. I explained that our two current employees were the only workers we had, and I also pointed out that our business is actually immigrant owned. Since my dad and I are both immigrants from Montenegro, this didn't seem to faze him at all. Ken then doubled down and demanded that we at least send a white employee. I tried to explain to him calmly that the ethnicity of our employees makes absolutely no difference to the quality of their work. I even tried to reason with him by saying that as European immigrants ourselves, my family and I aren't really all that different from immigrants from the Philippines, China, Mexico, or anywhere else in the world. His response to this was to accuse us of stealing jobs and launch into a truly vile, xenophobic tirade. He started spouting hateful garbage along the lines of, "This is Trump's America now," and that people like us don't deserve his business, After letting him rant and rave for a few more moments and realizing there was absolutely no reasoning with this person, I simply told him to find another contractor to do his job and hung up the phone. I was just completely speechless at his blatant racism and sense of entitlement. After years of condescension, I finally lost it on my dad's friend. Years ago, my father befriended a man named Harold through mutual acquaintances, and they became quite close. I was around 18 and in college when I first met Harold, and we never really developed any sort of close relationship ourselves. However, he always seemed to consider himself some sort of family confidant and consistently treated me in an incredibly infantilizing and patronizing manner. Every single time I knew I was going to see him, I would try to mentally prepare myself, hoping it wouldn't be too bad this time, but he would inevitably prove me wrong almost immediately. Harold had a knack for disregarding my personal boundaries, making remarks like, "You're not 19, you're a baby," while I was in the middle of conversations with other people. He would constantly belittle me, my academic pursuits, and my hobbies at every opportunity. He was always aware that his comments annoyed me, and he would often follow up with a faux playful question, asking if I hated him. I always brushed it off and said no, but only to keep the peace for my father's sake. The incident that finally pushed me over the edge happened one day at a family barbecue. Harold interrupted the entire gathering to announce, "I actually really like you, even though you're a terribly impolite brat." I was 20 years old at the time. I had been keeping to myself all day, quietly working on a college paper during the barbecue, but I had made sure to respond politely and respectfully whenever anyone spoke to me, and even if that hadn't been the case, I knew deep down that he simply had no right to speak to me in such a demeaning way. After that, I consciously started avoiding any events where I knew Harold would be present. Just yesterday, it was my father's girlfriend's birthday, and they hosted a small luncheon at my dad's apartment. I attended with my fiance and our 6-month-old son. Of course, Harold was there. Despite not having seen him in several months, He immediately reverted to treating me as if I were still a clueless child. It was as if my engagement, motherhood, or the fact that I was now 26 years old meant absolutely nothing. I spent the entire party simply ignoring his unsolicited and frankly ridiculous, helpful advice about how I was far too young to be married or a mother. Thankfully, most of the other guests seemed to subtly disagree with his ridiculous pronouncements, which was somewhat validating. My baby thankfully slept for a good portion of the afternoon in a bassinet set up in my old bedroom. However, when he woke up and started showing signs of hunger, I went to breastfeed him and excuse myself from the party for a little while. When I returned, I was immediately met with a barrage of jokes and comments, all directed at me by Harold, about how I was probably struggling if my son was managing to leech me away for so long. He then proceeded to interrupt a conversation I was having with another of my dad's friends to question virtually every aspect of my parenting choices. Ironically, this man doesn't even have custody of his own daughter, by the way, and to make even more ageist remarks. I finally reached my breaking point when he had the audacity to ask if I had ever thought about giving my baby up for adoption. That was it. I picked up my son, told my fiance we were leaving immediately, and we quickly said our goodbyes to everyone except Harold. As we were heading towards the door, Harold came over to ask why we were leaving so abruptly. I tried to quickly make up a polite excuse, but he kept pressing us to stay. After a brief and uncomfortable back and forth, he predictably jokingly asked if I hated him, and this time, without hesitation, I simply said, "Yes, Harold, I do. Can we please leave now?" He didn't say another word, and we left. On the drive home, my fiance told me he was proud of me for finally standing up for myself. My father called me this morning with the exact opposite reaction, and we ended up having a minor argument, but we ultimately decided to drop the subject for now. I'm sure the situation isn't completely resolved, but if it escalates further, it certainly won't be because of anything I do. This is definitely not my proudest moment, and a small part of me even regrets losing my cool, but I am absolutely done tolerating that man's constant disrespect. Harold infantilizing her for years, then the adoption comment. Unbelievable entitlement. Ever been treated like a child by someone like Harold? Share your stories in the comments. Disneyland Justice entitled, "Mom Cuts the Line, Gets Her Whole Crew Banned." I recently revisited Disneyland for the first time since I was a kid, maybe around 9 years old. It was a blast, but wow, the lines were way longer than I remembered, though to be fair, maybe back then I was just too hyped up on childhood excitement to notice the wait times. My friend and I are pretty chill, so we decided to take advantage of the single rider lines to cut down on waiting, since riding separately wasn't an issue for either of us. While we were patiently queuing in the single rider line, this family of 4, mom, dad, and 2 daughters, brazenly walked straight through the middle of the line, holding hands like they were parading through. Naturally, several people around us started muttering and asking what on earth they thought they were doing. The mom loudly proclaimed that they had forgotten something on the ride. They pushed their way all the way to the merge point where the single rider line, fast pass line, and the regular queue all converged. That's when one of the women behind me just yelled out, dripping with sarcasm, "What exactly did you forget?" It dawned on everyone in the single rider line at once that she was just shamelessly trying to cut the line and get on the ride with her kids. The collective fume was palpable. Incredibly, they actually managed to get ushered into the pre-ride movie area before my friend and I even got there. We were both completely stunned that no one from the Disney staff had intervened or called them out on their blatant line cutting. Meanwhile, all of us single riders were practically bonding over the sheer audacity and entitlement of this woman. So as soon as my friend and I were herded into the pre-ride movie room, I immediately flagged down a staff member and described the lady and her kids, explaining exactly what she had done. He listened, but then shrugged apologetically and said that since they were already that far into the boarding process, there wasn't really much he could do at that point. Seriously? Undeterred, we continued through to the actual car boarding line, and wouldn't you know it, there they were, Disney mom and her 2 kids right in front of us. This time I stopped another employee, explained the entire situation again, emphasizing that they had cut through the single rider line. She said she would let someone know, but then proceeded to walk off in the opposite direction from the ride operators, which felt incredibly unhelpful. Then, one of the daughters ran back down the line to a man standing directly behind my friend and me, tugged on his arm and whined, "Come on, Dad." We turned around and sure enough, Dad was standing there, looking deeply uncomfortable and refusing to join his family. It was pretty clear he'd heard all the complaints in the line and wanted no part of it. At this point, everyone in the line started raising their voices, making sure they were heard. People were saying things like, "Ian, what a terrible example to set for your children. And what makes them think they're so entitled, bah?" And everyone else is waiting patiently, some for hours, and why lie to get what you want? The whole line was basically united and loudly expressing their disapproval, ensuring this family knew exactly what we all thought of their behavior. Dad continued to hang back, letting other people move ahead of him in line, head practically hung in shame, while his wife and daughters inched closer to the front. I finally reached my limit. I turned to the people in front of me and asked if they would mind if I stepped ahead to speak to the ride operators directly, explaining what had happened, because there was absolutely no way I was going to let them get away with this and get on the ride. The people ahead of us were completely on board and happily stepped aside to let me through. Mom was now blocking the walkway as they were next in line to board. I tapped her on the shoulder and said a very pointed "excuse me," staring her directly in the eye. She huffed but slid over without a word. I then spoke directly to the ride operator, clearly stating, "This lady and her 2 children just cut the entire single rider line, claiming they forgot something. You can verify with anyone in this line." She shot me the most venomous, shocked, and disgusted glare imaginable. I walked back to my friend, and then another woman from the line stepped forward to corroborate my story to the ride operator. Disney Mom then tried to argue that both of us were lying. That's when pretty much everyone else in the line erupted, all yelling and confirming the exact same story, determined to make sure she and her kids didn't get on that ride. And guess what? It worked. They were eventually escorted out a side exit by staff, and the entire line erupted in applause. It was glorious. Disney line justice? So satisfying. Entitled Mom and Crew banned? Yes. Hit like and subscribe for more Entitled People wins. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.